says they would participate in the shindig we got going here. It was from my sister. And anybody knows my sister, she's doesn't ask very much of anyone. She likes to do everything on her own, but you know, I jumped at the chance. I thought, you know what, I got a story to tell. And you know, it's one of hope. And you know, and being from this community, we need that here. We need those stories of success, those stories of hope. And by no means am I perfect standing up here in front of you. But I've overcome some obstacles in my life that so many people struggle with. And first and foremost, you know, addiction. And this past April 19th, I just had my, what we call in the business, sobriety birthday. 7 years ago on April 19th was the last time I used methamphetamine. You know, even saying it now, I'm just, you know, it seems like it's been so long ago that I last used. But really, as addicts, you know, we have to have some motivation. And, you know, and my motivation is that, you know, that's in my past, but it could also be my present if I make some poor decisions or poor choices. You know, along my journey, I had so many people that were instrumental in helping me, but it was me that had to ask for the help. And, you know, I revert back to when I was finally arrested, April 19, 2017. And that cop car ride was one of those pivotal points where I was thinking to myself, you know what, finally I'm gonna get away from this stuff that I have no idea how to get away from. But I knew I was gonna be sitting in a jail cell for an extended stay, if you will. And it was then I decided, you know what, I need to figure out why I'm doing this and figure out how I'm gonna get to the next step. And you know, and sobering up in jail is not the funnest experience. I mean, if you think about how much methamphetamine I was using by the time I got arrested, I shouldn't be standing here in front of you. And it truly is a miracle. And I always revert back to my mom's prayer. She's not a religious person, but I know she prayed and prayed and prayed and prayed for that day for me to be picked up. And you know, I get to the jail. My dad says, first person I call is my dad. If you know my dad, he's a big, imposing figure, and I've always respected my dad. But when the drugs had taken over, I didn't care. They couldn't love me enough to get me sober. I called him up. I said, Dad, I'm going to be in here for a while. And you know, his response to me was good. At least I know where you're at. And you know, we don't have to worry about anything else, but you need to be there. He said, I could bail you out, but what would that teach you? And so I was thankful I wasn't at the time, because I was like, God, just get me out of here, you know, I'll be good. And knowing all well that wasn't going to be the case. It was going to be, how can I get high again? And so you know, my parents never gave up on me. And that was huge as far as, you know, I had the support there. All I needed to do was ask for help. I got my little journey that goes through the Department of Corrections, the Montana Department of Corrections. And it's this mill of people reoffending, going to jail, going to treatment, reoffending. So I started kind of studying how I was going to get through this. And I had a meeting with a counselor that came to the jail, and I started picking her brain on, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this to myself? And she said, I told her a little bit of, my first marriage was failed. I walked out on my oldest son and my ex-wife. My second marriage was same thing. And she likened it to me carrying around this backpack that was full of guilt and full of shame. That's what drove my addictions. And it wasn't until then I realized that, man, I was really beating myself up over choices that I made, not choices that anyone else made. It was my own selfishness that decided to do this. And she said, you got to start unpacking that. And that was my next task, was how do I unpack this backpack full of guilt and shame? And go through I sit in jail in Missoula County for 10 months, 11 months. And, if you've been to jail, you know that it sucks. I mean, there's, you get to be with 25, 30 other guys every day. Maybe you get to go outside for an hour, get to watch, boring soaps on TV, although I kind of got into them. But you start to do some soul searching, and for me, my life up until my first use of methamphetamine wasn't bad. I come from a 2-parent household. They loved me. They unconditionally. And it wasn't until I started making those bad choices that I started to make this turn. And, it's like I said, I'm trying to figure all of this out. And, I'm a pretty smart guy. I like to give myself credit for being smart, but, I have a college degree. I had a nice job, that paid the bills, but there was something missing there, and I didn't know what it was. And, my first divorce fails. I jump into another relationship that, now we can talk about it. It was toxic. There was a lot of drinking, a lot of, fighting, a lot of all the bad stuff that comes with it. And I bailed on it. And I had 2 boys with my second ex-wife. We'll go into that a little bit later. But, I carried around this guilt from walking out on those fatherly duties I had. And, then when that happened, I remember my first experience with methamphetamine. I was kind of a weekend warrior cocaine addict and alcoholic for years, and spent probably $1 million on the drugs and alcohol. And, I always thought I had it together, like, oh yeah, I'm just gonna, we're gonna get high all weekend, and then I'll show up for work on Monday. I don't know how worth a dang I'll be, but I'll be there. And then I gave myself, it was like I'm functioning, or what I thought was functioning. And I decided, I always talk about, I made an informed adult decision to try methamphetamine. I knew what it was gonna do. I knew, but I thought, no, that won't happen to me. I'm not gonna lose everything. I'm not gonna turn into a junkie or a thief and so I remember the first time I smoked it, and it was just beyond anything I ever experienced. And it was from that point, I was no longer driving. It was from that point that I was on this path of destruction that I didn't see coming. And it took everything. In just a short period of time. I was an employed person that, had a car, which you take for granted when you finally, succumb to that. It strips everything from you. And it was the most greedy drug that I had experienced to date. And, then it kind of progresses. Then it's like, all right, well, I'm not getting high smoking it anymore. Let's put it in a syringe and let's inject it. And then that was another step in the evolution of my use and abuse of methamphetamine, and it was rough. I mean, all that matters, and I know now, after doing, some studies on it, and it hijacks your brain to a point where that's all you want. It didn't matter I had 2 ex-wives and children running around, because I didn't care. All I wanted to do was get high. And there wasn't anything I wouldn't do to get high. I mean, I did have some hard limits, but we won't talk about those. But it just took over to the point where I had no idea of how to stop it. Getting arrested was what I needed when I needed it, because that took me away from the drug. It helped me to sober up a little bit, and it was nice to be in my right mind again, or sort of in my right mind, and being able to, I was really analytical about how I was going to maintain my sobriety. And I went through the DOC. They said, you're going to sit for almost a year, then you're going to go to treatment. And treatment was good. I took certain things from treatment that I use today, but there was a lot of garbage that I just didn't think applied to me and I didn't have to do. There's one exercise I did in treatment that I'll share with you guys that was really eye-opening to me. My oldest son, he's 23 years old now, 22. And my relationship with him is non-existent. And who do I have to blame for that? I have no one to blame for me. But they made us do this exercise where we wrote a letter from him to me. And he was probably 16 or 17 at the time I was in treatment. And I really dove deep into how I would feel if my dad had done what I'd done to him. And, I got those hard words out on the paper, and it was, really hateful and mad and everything. And I thought the exercise was done. Here's my letter, go to turn it in. Oh, now you're gonna read it to everybody. And, big tough guy, you think, oh, I'm not gonna cry, And I start reading this letter, and it just starts to tear at my heart, at everything. And it was one of those points where I was like, God, you are such an asshole, for lack of a better term. You've caused so many victims in your addiction that, you may never get to repair those bridges that you burned. And today, I still don't have a relationship with him. And it's not his fault. It's my fault. But in that healing journey, I had to realize that I have to forgive myself for that, what I was in the past. If he were to call me right now, he'd get sober, Graig, and I'd be able to help or do whatever he needs. But back then, when he needed me most, like Milo was talking about, I wasn't there. But I stopped beating myself up over that. And from then on, I was able to heal. If he wants a relationship, it's got to be on his terms, and I got to be okay with it. And that's part of my healing journey. From the DOC sending me to treatment, they said, you got to go live in a pre-release. How many people know what pre-release is? Okay, you're locked down with a bunch of other dudes, but you get to go to work. And you get to do maybe some groups or some pro-social activities, they call it. And, it was tough. It was like, all right, well, I'm out on the streets, but I'm really not out on the streets. I gotta listen to, when they tell me to go to bed, they tell me, oh, you gotta clean the kitchen this week. You have all these different hoops you gotta jump through to satisfy them. it wasn't until I walked in that pre-release that I really got humbled in my recovery. I applied to the Bozeman pre-release, which is smaller. It's got, I think, 60 beds or something. And there's other ones, there's Billings, you hear the stories as you're going through, you're like, oh, you can get high in Butte, So then I was like, I don't want to go to Butte because I don't want to get high. I walk into the pre-release in Bozeman, and it's right before Christmas. I'd gotten out of treatment, and they send you in the van, and you're still wearing the scrubs that they dress you in because you don't have any clothes. I mean, you got locked up with nothing. And so I'm walking into the Bozeman pre-release and, kind of walking like I always walk. And Melissa Kelly, who's the director of the pre-release in Bozeman, she looks at me. She kind of looks me up and down, and she's an attractive lady. So I don't know if I was sticking my chest out more or what, but she looked at me and she said, oh, you must be Graig Gilham. And I said, yeah, that's me. And she's like, you think you're God's gift to women, don't you? Boy, my head went from this big head that I'm going to run this pre-release to, holy crap. This woman called me out on my BS from the get-go. And it was then, I was like, maybe you do think that. Maybe you need to look at that. And, and it was then I was like, man, this is the place I need to be. And we had our sessions, her and I, and, they were good. There was growth there. She said, you're a manipulator. I was like, what does that mean? She's like, you think you can manipulate any situation to get what you want? And I started thinking about it, and I was like, man, I'm a manipulator, And I struggled with it, but there was growth there. And another point in my recovery that always sticks out to me was the intake counselor. And I love counselors because there's some counselors that are really awesome. There's some counselors that are just there for a paycheck. There's some counselors that, really truly care about you. I walk into this guy's office and you can tell he's a stoner. And I hate labeling people like that because it's really an awful character trait. But I sit down and visit with him and he's doing my intake. Gets to the question, what's your drug of choice and how did you use it? And, my drug of choice at the time of my incarceration was methamphetamine. And I shot it up. That's what I told him. And he kind of goes, and I was like, what was that all about? He's like, oh, nothing. I tried to glaze over it. And he scoffed at what I told him was my drug of choice and how I used it. So stubborn me is like, no, you're going to tell me why you did that. And after a couple minutes of back and forth, finally he's like, all right, you're going to be back through here. I said, what do you mean? He said, well, he spouted out this statistic. 2% of IV meth users stay in recovery the rest of their life. And I thought about it, and I thought, man, that's a lot of meth users that don't stay clean. And it was at that point I was like, watch me. I said, watch me be part of that 2%. I don't want to be the 98%. And he was like, yeah, well, whatever, we'll see. And so that was one of the points in my recovery where I was like, you know what? This isn't going to be easy. This isn't going to be, all unicorns and rainbows. It's going to be tough. And you need to really look yourself in the mirror and say, do you want this? And there's going to be things thrown at you all the time, but you have to deal with them. And, I finished out the pre-release, and I finished out in jail, which ideally you complete the program and you go out on conditional release, you meet your PO, you move in somewhere. That's how you're supposed to do it. But the last 2 weeks of my stay at the pre-release, they arrested me and they threw me in jail. And here I am thinking, man, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing. What do you guys do? And I went to my boss at the time and I said, hey, let me bank my overtime. And you pay it to me when I get out of this pre-release so I can move into a place. And that's that criminal thinking, and maybe I was sober, maybe I thought I had my stuff together, but I was still trying to manipulate the system. We had an investigator in the pre-release goes out and asks my boss, why is Graig working so many hours and his paycheck doesn't jive? And he's like, oh, he asked me to bank his overtime. And I was like, why'd you tell him that, And so they arrested me for deceptive practice. It wasn't a criminal charge, but it was like, you're gonna go sit in the pre-release, or in the jail for the rest of your stay there. So 2 weeks, 4th of July, I remember laying there trying to read a book in the light of the window and hearing the fireworks go off. And even now I make comments, I'm like, man, I remember when I was sitting in jail listening to fireworks outside. I said, but that was me trying to manipulate a situation. And now I'm aware of that. Maybe I still do it a little bit, but not to the extent of I'm harming someone else or myself. And I think I had to go through what I've gone through to be able to stand up here and kind of explain those situations. Because there's, you get up here and you look at me, like when you're looking at me, what do you think? What pops in your mind? Go ahead and say something that, your perception of me.
You're God's gift to women.
Touche. But there's a certain perception. Some guy walks in wearing fishing gear and some wool socks and cool kicks. It's like you don't think of me as that person out on the street wearing a backpack hiking all over town trying to get high, do you? I wouldn't think you would. But that's who I was. I was that person that is out there struggling to get his next high. And and we're so quick to judge somebody by what they look like or what they're doing. And I do it too, and I catch myself because if you've ever driven in Helena or in Great Falls and you see a guy on a bike, I always tell my wife, that's a pre-releaser. Because you don't get to drive in there. You either walk or you bike to everywhere you go. And she's like, no, how do you know? I'm like, trust me, he's in the pre-release because, I was that guy. I know what it's like to hike through the snow to go to the job service to try to find someone that'll hire a felon. And there's challenges. We'll get to the next step of my journey, and that's, I got out of the pre-release, go on to conditional release, move into this kind of halfway house with a bunch of dudes that, are in recovery, trying to be, and wasn't going so great. My first act of being out on probation was I borrowed a car that didn't have a license plate on it, and I thought, I'm gonna get home to Browning. So what do? Jump in this car, start driving home to Browning, pull through Townsend, which is one of the widest. It's rough. You get profiled going through Townsend. And who do I pass? I pass the sheriff. He follows me, and I'm just sweating bullets. I'm like, I'm sober, which is a good thing, but I'm in a vehicle that, it did have a license plate, but it wasn't the right license plate. And I get about 3 miles out of town, Townsend up by Canyon Ferry, lights come on, and I'm like, oh no, what am I gonna do? He comes out, first thing I blurt out is, sir, I'm on probation. Because that's what they tell you, you have to say if you have any interaction with law enforcement. I said, I'm on probation, I just want to let you know. He's like, well, if I search the vehicle, it's not my vehicle. I said, I don't think you're gonna find anything, but go ahead and search it, because I wanted to comply. And he said, well, let's get a hold of your PO. It's on the weekend. And so I'm like dialing her number one button at a time, like, oh, I don't want to hit send. finally I hit send and it goes to her voicemail. I leave her a message. I said, I got pulled over in, what county is Townsend? Broadwater County, which I'm only supposed to be in Gallatin County, by the way. No travel permit. So I got pulled over in Broadwater County by a sheriff's deputy for driving, and I don't have a license either. And so he's like, tell you what, you've been all right with me. I'm gonna give you a ticket for no license. I'm not gonna give you the driving while suspended because that's a whole nother can of worms. And so he gives me a ticket for no license. He said, you know what? I'm gonna turn and I'm gonna go that way. He said, if this car's parked here tonight, when I come back through, I'm gonna have it towed. So I'm like, well, what do you want me to do? You know, and he's like, I'm not gonna tell you to jump in and drive it to wherever you're going, but I'm just telling you that I'm going that way. And he pulls away, and I sit there at that wheel, and I'm like, what should I do? Should I go? Should I turn around? What, you know, I take off and I take every back road to Browning and get up here in about 2.5 hours. So that was my first experience with my PO, because she calls me Monday morning and she said, you need to come in here. You need to take a drug test. You need to, do all of these things. You weren't doing what you were supposed to be doing. And that was the only hiccup I had on probation, because she basically said, you can make this as easy or as hard as you want to. I'm just going to be here to try to correct your bad choices, and if I have to, I'll put you back in jail. Get up to Browning, and it was when I got to Browning that I know I wanted to see my boys, and that meant I had to get a hold of my ex-wife, and I didn't know how to approach that situation, but I think we ran into each other, and she's like, oh, you want to drive for me? And I'm like, sure, I'll drive for you if you want. And she was having beers, and I was like, oh, I can't. I'm sober, but I'll drive for you. And I can't remember, the boys weren't even here. I made it all the way up here. They weren't even, that was my intention. But I got in the car, and we took a drive, all that, go around the hump, let's go out to St. Mary's and park and whatever. And, my ex-wife at the time had gotten a lot off her chest, and, and we ended up going back to the house that we built, and nothing happened. I'll guarantee it. Nothing happened that night. We woke up, and, and it was like time for me to go and get back, because my PO knew I was gone. But so that's kind of how I transitioned from jail to pre-release, or to conditional release. And and it was a couple, I don't know, must have been a month later or so, I get a call from my ex-wife. She says, come to Polson. Gavin, who's our oldest son together, he's playing in a basketball tournament. They want somebody to coach him. And I'm in this halfway house. I don't have a license, don't have a car, but if we can put in as much energy into doing good things as we did into getting high, that's that balance that we find. So I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna get to Polson. I don't know how, but I'm gonna get there. And finally call the bus station. I'm like, hey, where do you guys go to Polson? And they said, no, we'll go as far as Missoula. So I jumped on a bus, caught a ride to Missoula. I called my cousin that lives in Ronan. She came down, brought me up, and I don't have a place to stay. I don't have much money, don't have, all of these challenges. And my ex-wife was like, well, you can stay with us. I'm like, well, don't you think that would be a little bit weird? Because the boys, what? Anyway, it worked out. And that first night of us together, she looks at me and she's like, you want to get back together? And I was like, just floored. I was like, what? Are you being serious right now? And she was like, yeah. She's like, I really want to get sober, was her words to me. And she kind of asked, well, how'd you do it? I was like, well, I went to jail. I don't don't do that. But it's like, she really had, she was being genuine, and I could tell that. And I was like, well, all these things red flags just start going off in my mind. I'm like, God, I did this to her, she did this to me, I did it, all of this past stuff. And I made up my mind right there, and I told her, I said, you know what, everything that happened back there, it's got to stay there. I said, because if it doesn't stay there, then it's going to sabotage everything we got going from this point forward. And that was kind of rule number one, and it's still a rule today. It's like we're gonna not use alcohol, drugs, and we're still leery of it. Like, we'll go around people that are having drinks, and I admire people who can have 2 or 3 drinks and stop. That's not me or her. And we were really leery about that, and it's like, it's summertime, man, maybe a beer would taste really good right now, but as soon as that first drop of alcohol were to hit our lips, boy, the fight would be on. I guarantee it. So we just choose not to. And, and her story of recovery is beautiful and awesome, and guess who had a front row ticket to it? I did. And I didn't get her sober. I didn't have any, well, I can't say I didn't have anything to do with it, but it was like, man, you've been through some stuff. I can't help you with that. I'm not a professional. But this is what I did. I went and talked to a counselor. And, and to see that, her talking to a counselor and just seeing these, all this trauma, everything was just, being lifted off her shoulders. It was really beautiful to see. And, we work at that every day. It's like it's not perfect, but it's definitely, now do I recommend everybody go get back with their ex? No. But in our situation, we had this foundation of, we really liked each other. And you remove that one thing, that drugs and alcohol, man, then things can start to grow. And it's been a true blessing to get a second chance. I talk about second chances because they're few and far between, right? Usually when you do something, you do it, you don't get a redo at it. But here I am standing up here in front of you with a redo. And what am I going to do? I'm going to make the best of it, because it's not, second chances aren't always promised. And I had to go through what I went through to be able to stand up here and give this away to you. You talk about medicine, it's a story of hope, and it's a story that, if you just make that choice. I come from that camp of addiction is a disease, and when you don't treat it, what happens when you don't treat diabetes? It kills you, right? Or it leads to death. So addiction's the same thing. They say jail's institutions of death. I was on a path where it was going to kill me if I didn't have some sort of intervention. And it's cool because all you have to do is make a choice to treat it. And my choice is just to be sober every day. It's yesterday don't matter. Tomorrow, I might not be here tomorrow, or it's not here yet. And I just make that choice. And you touched a little bit on affirmations, and when these green eyes open every morning. The first thing that pops into my head is, I'm just going to be sober today. And that starts my day. And then I pray, and I always pray for, the addicts who are still suffering, because they're people too. And, when I talked about labels and whatnot, it's easy for someone to call someone a junkie. It's easy for us to say, oh, look at him, he's all whacked out. But until you've been in their shoes, you don't realize what they're going through. And I've been in those shoes, and I might say it sometimes, but if I were to approach that person, I would never call them that to their face, because that does more harm than it does a kind word or a hello, or, make them feel human again, because they already know that they're feeling less than as it is. And, and I talk about an experience. I went into a salon here when I was in my using days, and all I wanted was a haircut. And I walked in, sat down. The ladies, one was sweeping, one was kind of organizing, and no one was in there except me, but it was high on meth Graig that walked in. And when I said, hey, I was just wondering if I could get a haircut, my job was probably moving around 100 miles an hour, but I experienced rejection, because the one kind of flipped open the appointment book and looked at, nope, we're full. I was like, what? There's no one in here. Are you sure you can? And then it hit me, like, oh my God, they think you're high. Which I was. But it hit me, that rejection hit me and sent me into 6 more months of self-pity and feeling less than. Whereas maybe if they gave me a haircut and told me have a good day, I might have thought, okay, I'm gonna make my court date now. But instead it set me back. And, and I just encourage everyone, and this is a good group of people that, if you just spread that kindness, it goes a lot farther than labeling someone so quickly. And, trust me, there's bad ones out there, but, they're somebody's son, they're somebody's daughter, they need that hand up. And, not necessarily a hand out, but a hand up to see through that, because, man, it's a dark place. It's a dark place where, you don't want to go if you can avoid it. And addiction doesn't discriminate. There isn't a family in here or family member that, you shake a family tree, I heard, and an addict will fall out. And it's, it's really, really, we're moving home. I'll transition into that. My wife and I and our youngest are moving home at the end of next month. And I couldn't be more excited than to be in Browning, Montana. We've lived off the reservation for 6 years now. We've moved 6 times in 6 years, which in the same place. We're ready to be home. We're ready to be part of the community. The sober community, I'm hoping, because, let's get rid of that stigma of sobriety is not cool. I think we're kind of at that point where it could start to gain some traction. We're part of a group in Great Falls called the Sober Life. That is a great movement that, it gives people activities to do when before they just went to the casino and got drunk. And it's part of that giving back your message and supporting people who are sober or who want to make change, giving them some resources to do it. We're so quick to say, oh, look at him, he's acting better than us because he's sober. It has nothing to do with that for me. For me, it's I'm the best version of me, and I'm going to try to be a better person today than I was yesterday. And once you let all of that go, and all of those people that are judging you, or all, you can start to heal and start to spread the message of sobriety is cool. And I know a lot of families that are affected that, if they could just get that push in the right direction, it could be a great thing. But thank you guys for think I'm about, oh geez, I went over. Thank you guys for listening. I'll be here for a while. You can pick my brain on anything, but it's, in order to keep this gift of sobriety that I got to come to these things and I got to give it away to you people. And if one thing resonates with you, take that and build upon it and say, hey, look, that guy used to be a junkie, but look at him now. He owns a business. He's got a family. He's got his family back, and it's all because I made that choice to give up that one thing. So thank you.
Great Gilham, everybody. Man, you had some cool things there that I've read and can relate to. Proud of you. I don't know, I can't even say young man. I'm proud of you, young warrior.